The bitter cold that morning wasn't the kind that merely nipped at my fingertips, a playful warning from the mountains. No, this was the kind that clawed its way into your very bones, hollowing you out from the inside, leaving you hollow and fragile. It was the kind that screamed how truly far Montana was from mercy, a desolate truth etched into every frozen landscape. I, Elias Thorne, rode slow across the ridge above Bitterroot Creek, my breath fogging in short, desperate bursts, vanishing as quickly as they came. The only sound was the muffled crunch of my horse Flint's hooves breaking the profound silence of the snow-packed earth. Out here there was no one to impress, no one to wait for. Just snow time and the quiet, crushing weight of a life carried far too long. Down in the hollow where the creek cut through a line of frostbitten willows, something shifted. At first I dismissed it a trick of the wind, perhaps a branch finally succumbing to its own icy burden. But then it moved again, not fast, not strong but weak, like something desperately trying to remain unseen. A ripple beneath the ice. I reined Flint to a stop, my eyes narrowing, piercing the gray light. There, right where the ice bowed precariously in the current, was a hand, pale as bone-thin fingers twitching under the surface, reaching drowning slow. I didn't shout. There was no one to hear, no one to call for help. I was off Flint in a second, my boots skidding across the treacherous slope, knees punching down into the unforgiving snow. The ice beneath me crackled ominously as I crept forward on my belly, a silent prayer forming on my lips that it would hold just long enough. One more second. One more desperate reach. My fingers brushed hers, and when I pulled, she came up far too easily, too light, as if she had already surrendered to the frigid embrace of death. Her skin was mottled with frostbite, lips cracked and bleeding from the cold hair stiff with ice and mud. She wasn't moving, just barely breathing, a faint wisp of life clinging to her fragile form. I hauled her over my shoulder, the weight surprisingly light, and stumbled back up the bank. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest against the biting cold, a raw, burning agony. Flint danced nervously beside me, but he didn't spook. The old mare knew better than to question my silence, my grim determination. By the time we reached the cabin, my coat was soaked through, heavy with melted snow. I kicked the door open with one boot, the wood groaning in protest, and laid her out on the bed without a single word. She didn't stir, her stillness a chilling testament to her near-death experience. I set a hot stone under her arms, another near her feet, desperate to coax warmth back into her frozen limbs. The old potbelly stove groaned against the howling wind, but it was holding, radiating a fragile warmth. I never touched her bare skin. If I didn't have to, I always kept a layer of something, a blanket, a towel, my sleeve between us. Not because I feared what she'd think, but because I knew deep in my bones what it meant to be touched wrong at the wrong time when you weren't ready. I wasn't about to add my name to that cursed list of those who had inflicted such wounds. Hours bled into one another. Snow drifted up along the windowsills, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight, plunging the cabin into a deepening twilight. I sat near the fire, my boots steaming, a weathered Bible resting open in my lap. The pages were warped, some marked with black coal dust, others stained with what I guessed was dried blood. It had belonged to Mary, my late wife. I didn't read it often, but tonight felt different, heavy with an unspoken weight. I looked over at the girl. No name, no words, just shivering breaths and half-healed bruises marring her jawline, a testament to some recent brutal encounter. On her wrist, where the torn fabric of her blouse fell away, I saw something inked into her skin, faded, smudged, but clear enough to pierce my heart property. I didn't ask who wrote it. I didn't need to. The truth of it was a bitter taste in my mouth, a familiar ache in my soul. Instead, I read softly, more to myself than to her, my voice, a rough whisper in the quiet cabin. He shall not leave you in the deep, nor forsake you when the floodwaters rise. My voice cracked not from emotion, but from disuse, a raw sound in the stillness. Outside the window, the wind died just for a moment. The flame in the stove danced steady, a fragile beacon of warmth. Then I saw them. Hoof prints. Not old ones packed and faded by time. These were fresh, sharp edges, the distinct mark of 4-point steel shoes. I stared through the frost-rimmed glass, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Whoever it was hadn't come to knock. I leaned back slowly, my eyes still locked on the oppressive darkness beyond the tree line. I didn't reach for my rifle. Not yet. Some things needed watching first, a silent assessment of the brewing storm. The girl shifted in her sleep, a sharp exhale like she was running even while lying still. I saw the way her fingers clenched, twitching in some nightmare she hadn't escaped yet. And still I didn't speak because I understood. Snow didn't lie. It remembered what people tried to bury, the hidden cruelties, and tonight it was whispering low and quiet that trouble was already here, and perhaps had been watching longer than I realized. But I didn't move from that spot. I stayed by the fire, let the wind howl, let the cold press its face against the windows like a malevolent ghost, and waited. Because sometimes the only thing you can do for a stranger you've pulled from the ice is to simply be there, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. She woke like a drowning woman, shot back into her body, gasping for air. No name, no place. Just the searing sting of air in her lungs and a fire that wasn't flames but pure burning panic. Her eyes snapped open to timber walls, a flickering stove, and a shadow hunched and silent in the corner. She saw me, the man still watching. That was all it took. Her hand shot out, fingers wrapping around a small forgotten knife on the table nearby. A gift or a trap, she didn't care. The blade kissed the skin of her throat before I could even shift in my seat. Her hands shook violently, her breathing louder than the wind outside. Her voice was locked tight behind bruised ribs, but her eyes, wide and terrified, screamed everything. Don't come closer. I'll do it. I've done worse. I didn't move. I rose slowly from the chair, my palms loose at my sides, not afraid, not towering over her. I simply turned my back to her, walked to the door, and stepped out without a word. The cold rushed in behind me, a stark contrast to the cabin's fragile warmth. And for a moment she sat in that silence. Just her, the knife, the fire, and the terrible gnawing, knowing that she had no idea what came next. Her fingers loosened the knife, hitting the floor with a quiet thud, more tired than defiant. She stood, her legs uncertain beneath her, trembling slightly. The rough boards of the floor were cold against her bare feet. Each step a gamble, her body unsure of itself, her mind unsure of the world that had so recently tried to claim her. She touched the wall as she passed fingertips trailing splinters, as if trying to anchor herself to something real, something solid in this disorienting reality. The cabin was small. One bed, one chair, a cast iron pan still warm on the stove, a jar of beans, a faded curtain nailed haphazardly over the window. Nothing else. No ropes. No locks. No signs of the thing she feared most, the instruments of her recent torment. She stepped outside. The snow bit at her skin like 1,000 tiny needles, a sharp, invigorating pain, but she kept going, drawn by an unseen force. The sky above was a soft, muted gray, too soft, too quiet for the turmoil within her. She looked out across the vast, pristine white, and there I was, Elias, leaning against a fence post, my hat pulled low, my breath ghosting into the frigid air. I didn't look at her. I didn't move. I just let her see the empty landscape, the wide open way. She could run if she wanted, but she didn't. Not yet. That night, she lay on the bed wrapped in the same blankets she'd nearly died in, the wool a comforting weight against her bruised skin. She listened to the wind clawing at the window, a mournful lament, and the crack of logs breaking apart in the stove, a steady rhythmic pulse. Her fingers found the spot on her wrist, the place where the ink still stained her skin. It was faded now, smudged by water and time, but it was still there. Still hers. Still the lie someone had tried to make into truth. She closed her eyes and drifted not into sleep but into a kind of remembering. It wasn't clear, not like a photograph, more like a swirling fog. Faces without names, voices like sharpened knives, a room that stank of blood and tobacco, men laughing, hands grabbing her head being shaved, the sound of clippers louder than her own frantic heartbeat. A collar snapped tight around her neck. Leather, metal, rust. She flinched even in sleep, her jaw clenched, a silent scream trapped within her. Outside, the wind kept moaning a desolate symphony. The cabin groaned with old age, its timbers creaking under the relentless pressure of the cold. I sat by the fire, my eyes fixed on the dancing flames, lost in my own thoughts. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words since she'd come. I didn't ask. I didn't assume. I let her carry the silence like it belonged to her, a heavy mantle of unspoken pain. But I had left the knife on the table. I'd left the door unlocked. I could have taken things, could have fated her, could have made her beg, but I didn't. When the fire burned low, I stoked it again, tossed another log in, looked over once to see if she was breathing. She was curled under the wool, lost in memory and a weight that wasn't mine to name. At some point in the deep night, she rose barefoot, bare-armed, moving like a ghost, a whisper of a presence in the dim light. She crossed the room and stood in the open doorway. The snow came up to her ankles, her toes already turning red with the cold, but she didn't care. She stared out into the oppressive dark, her lips pressed tight, her breath sharp, ragged. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood a silent figure against the vast, unforgiving night. I watched from the firelight, my heart aching with a familiar empathy. I didn't say a word. I walked over quietly, slow, so she'd hear my steps, a deliberate warning. I draped an old quilt over her shoulders. Soft, faded, worn through at the corners, it was Mary's. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just stood there as it settled over her, heavy as kindness, a tangible comfort. She stayed that way a long time, watching nothing, maybe remembering something, maybe choosing not to. Then she turned and went back inside, laid down again, didn't ask my name, didn't give hers. The next morning she found the bucket and brought in water from the creek. Her fingers were red raw by the time she finished, a testament to her quiet determination. She boiled some for tea, made none for me, a subtle act of defiance perhaps. But when I came in from chopping wood, she handed me the cup anyway. Still no names, still no questions. But something different now, in the quiet between us, a fragile bridge beginning to form. That night when I lit the lantern, she didn't hide her face. When I left my gloves by the stove, she folded them neatly, deliberately. No ceremony, no thanks, just a gesture. That was the first time I saw the full extent of the bruises. Purple at the collarbone, faint fingerprints down her arm, a sickening tableau of violence. She noticed me noticing my gaze lingering on the awful marks. She didn't flinch this time either. I turned away, gave her the rest of the room again, a silent acknowledgement of her space. She didn't look at me for the rest of the night, but before bed she placed the empty honey jar upside down by the stove. Neat, deliberate, it stayed there, a quiet kind of offering. That was enough, at least for now. The thaw came slow that week, not in the air but between the silence that had kept us strangers. It didn't arrive with fanfare, just small things. A second cup on the table, a pan cleaned before the fire even died. The faint sound of her humming, not loud, not tuneful, but there in the background, like wind through pine, a soft, persistent melody. I noticed, but I didn't say a thing. I just kept chopping wood, hauling water, fixing hinges, and each time I returned to the cabin, something was a little cleaner, a little less broken. Alara didn't ask for thanks. She didn't wait for permission. She just did, like someone trying to rebuild a house that hadn't burned down yet but was thinking hard about it. On the third day I opened the cedar trunk I hadn't touched in years. The hinges groaned like something waking from a long-forgotten sleep. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers tied with bootlace, brittle from age and damp. At the bottom, beneath an old cavalry scarf and a rusted flask, I found what I wasn't looking for. The ledger. It smelled like blood and oil and something far, far worse. I didn't read it right away. I knew what it said. The pages weren't meant for record keeping. They were a list of atrocities, names reduced to numbers, losses marked as logistics. I turned the first page and saw the symbol pressed in wax. The same one stamped into every letter from the 11th, my old unit. The same one branded into my shoulder by memory, a phantom pain that never truly faded. Shashan losses. Women. Children. Units routed, villages cleared, not war, not battle, a sweep. The kind you're never ordered to do but always know you're part of, a silent complicity. I didn't look away. I turned page after page, each one worse than the last, each word a fresh stab to my conscience. And when I got to the bottom, I set the whole thing on fire. No ceremony, just flint match and smoke. The fire curled the edges inward, blackened the ink until it cracked, flared, once then died. The last page twisted slow, like it was trying to claw its way back from the inferno. I watched it vanish, then closed the stove door without blinking, the smell of burning paper a bitter reminder. That night Alara saw the ash drifting up from the chimney and said nothing. She just kept stitching the torn curtain with quiet, practiced hands. Her fingers moved like she was threading something back together she didn't believe in anymore. I sat down across from her, the Bible open in my lap, but untouched. The room was warmer than it had been in weeks, but it still felt cold between us, a lingering chill. Later, while cleaning behind the stove, she found it. A coin half buried under dust and years of neglect. She held it up to the firelight. The edges worn smooth, but the emblem still clear. A cavalry crest. 11th. I saw her staring at it, her gaze intense. I said nothing. She didn't ask. She didn't hold it out like a question, a challenge. Instead, she stepped outside with a lump of river clay and shaped the emblem with her thumbs. Same lines, same grooves. She carved it smooth, held it up to the light, then crushed it in her hand, letting the pieces fall between her fingers like dirt, a silent, powerful act of defiance. She came back inside with clay still caked in her palms and didn't bother washing it off. I didn't speak, but something settled in the room after that. Not peace exactly, but a shared weight, like two people finally willing to carry something without fighting over who dropped it first. The next morning I left a bundle on the foot of the bed. Nothing grand, just a wool dress, faded blue, slightly frayed at the cuffs. On the sleeve, barely visible, stitched in a thread long since dulled, Mary. Alara ran her fingers over the name. Didn't flinch, didn't cry. Just nodded once, a single slow movement, and that was enough. After breakfast, she swept the porch, fixed the crooked latch on the pantry door, mended one of my shirts without asking. I chopped wood until my hands blistered again, even though the pile was already high. We didn't talk much. Still didn't need to. The silence between us had shifted, less of a wall, now more of a bridge. Neither of us was ready to walk, but both could see it. Later I sat outside with the wind pushing hard against my coat, a relentless force. I watched her at the window, the fire flickering behind her like something holy, a sacred glow. She was still just standing there, holding a mug in both hands, not looking at me, not looking at anything, just breathing. And that's when I understood. Some people don't need saving. They need space to remember who they were before they were broken. Inside, she picked up the empty coin again, turned it in her hand like it meant something now. Not pain, not history, choice. And outside, I stared at the horizon until the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and the sky turned to iron, a cold, hard expanse. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew it. Some stories aren't told in words. They're told in what you burn and what you give back. Snow kept falling in Timber Ridge, the kind that drifted sideways, clung to hats, crept under collars, and made silence feel heavier than usual. At the saloon, there was always a fire going, always the scent of sour whiskey and sweat curling around the edges of wet wood and cigar smoke. It was the kind of place where men spoke low and watched each other louder. And on a Tuesday afternoon, with boots stomping slush off at the door, Silas Blackwood stepped in like someone looking for something that didn't want to be found. He didn't say much, just pulled a folded sheet of paper from the inside of his coat and laid it flat on the bar like a snake shedding its skin. The barkeep wiped his hands on a rag that was more stained than cloth and leaned in to see the print. A woman's face sketched from memory or rumor, dark hair, sharp eyes. Below it, bold block letters, wanted. Not for murder in the traditional sense. Just 3 words, escaped property. Reward for return. Alive or dead. Silas tapped his finger once on the line that mattered most, bounty guaranteed. Then he ordered bourbon and sat near the stove, waiting for mouths to loosen and ears to open. 10 miles east, Sheriff Gideon Vance was already riding out. His order hadn't come in the form of a poster. It came in a government envelope, official, precise, wrapped in the kind of legal ease that looked clean but bled dirty. On the surface, it said civil dispute. A missing woman wanted for breach of contract. Something about abandonment. Something about unauthorized relocation. But between the lines, Vance read it for what it was: permission. Permission to bring her in and not ask questions about the man who'd filed the complaint. Back at the cabin, I felt it first in my chest. The shift, not the weather, not the wind, but something quieter, a primal warning. I'd been in too many fights not to know the taste of one brewing. The birds had gone quiet that morning. Even the snow had stopped falling, holding its breath. Ilara had spent the better part of the day boiling hides behind the shed, her sleeves rolled, jaw-tight, hair pinned back to keep it out of the steam. She was getting stronger, quieter too, and I had learned enough to leave that kind of silence alone. Later, while setting traps north of the ridge, I found something that didn't belong. A boot print. Not mine. Not hers. Too wide, too fresh, not weather-worn. A second print nearby, a stumble step. Then another, sharper, deeper, like someone carrying weight or dragging something behind. I followed them just long enough to see where they disappeared into the tree line. Then I turned back, quiet, fast, my heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. That night, just past sundown, something hit the front door. Not a knock, not a fist, a thud. Low, heavy. I opened it slow, my hand on the rifle, but not raising it yet. On the porch, a burlap sack tied shut with cord. I didn't touch it at first, just stared. Snow dusted over the fabric in seconds like the mountain wanted to hide it again. When I finally brought it inside and untied it, a photograph slid out black and white bent at the corner. Ilara in a dress that didn't fit her standing next to a man whose eyes were too pleased and hands too tight. Behind the photo, a crumpled page with a wax seal. The same symbol I'd burned in the stove. She was standing in the corner when I turned around, her eyes fixed on the floor, her arms wrapped around herself like she didn't know where to hide. She saw the photo. She didn't blink. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice a raw whisper barely audible above the wind. I didn't speak. "I wanted to," she whispered, her voice cracking with the admission, "but I didn't." The wind scraped down the chimney, hissing through the cracks like it was listening, judging. I knelt and fed the fire one more log. The picture curled in the heat, then blackened and crumbled. I didn't look at her, but I stayed there, kneeling long enough that she knew I wasn't walking away. She sat down after that, just sat, hands in her lap, firelight flickering off the bruises still healing under her sleeves. She didn't cry. She didn't shake, but her jaw stayed clenched like her body didn't trust itself to be still. Outside, the trees moaned with weight, a mournful chorus. Somewhere in the dark, metal shifted against leather. Far off, but not far enough. Inside, the fire kept burning, and the walls held the quiet between them like it was something sacred. A fragile peace. But that peace, whatever it was, wouldn't last. Not with a price on her head traveling faster than snowmelt. Not with men like Silas Blackwood moving closer. And not with lawmen like Vance who wore injustice like a uniform and not a conscience. I stared at the flames and felt that old part of myself stir. The one that had carried orders without blinking, had loaded rifles without asking why. It was waking up again. But this time it wasn't for duty. It was for something harder. For someone worth choosing. And the night pressed in colder, now thicker, like it knew what was coming. But the fire still held. And in that small cabin near the edge of the world, two people waited not for rescue but for the storm. The morning broke hard and pale. Sky stretched taut like bone under frost. Snow was quiet but not silent. It muffled what wanted hiding and carried what needed warning. I stepped outside before dawn, my boots crunching into the crust. The cold didn't bother me much. Not anymore. Not after years of winters where the only warmth came from moving fast and trusting no one. But today the wind didn't just bite. It leaned like something pushing ahead of itself, a tangible force. Then came the voice. Loud, measured. Not the shout of a man afraid, but the commanding tone of someone used to being obeyed. I didn't need to look twice. I knew the voice, knew the cadence. Sheriff Gideon Vance stood at the edge of the clearing, dusted with road and ice. His hat low badge gleaming beneath his coat. His horse twitched at the reins, restless. Two other men flanked him, one older with a rifle loose at his hip and one younger, eyes alert but unsure. Finn Vance, the sheriff's son. I remembered him from years back. A boy too quiet for his age. He wasn't the boy anymore. I stepped off the porch, slow, my hands visible, a gesture of non-aggression. The door behind me creaked barely. I knew Ilara was watching. Felt it in my back like heat from a fire not seen. "You're harboring a fugitive," Vance called out, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "I got papers. Say so. Civil violation. Interference with federal recovery. You hand her over now, Thorne. Let the law run clean." I didn't answer right away. Just kept walking until I was halfway between the porch and the line of trees where the lawmen waited. The snow wasn't deep, but it dragged like memory, each step a heavy reminder of the past. I stopped within speaking distance, but still far enough to reach my rifle if I had to. "Let me see it," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Vance held up the warrant. Too far to read, but the seal was clear. "That piece of paper don't tell you who she is," I said, my voice low and steady. Somewhere deep in the woods, a raven let out a broken, mournful call. Vance sighed like a man tired of explanations, his patience wearing thin. He nodded to the two deputies. "Get him. Bring her out." I didn't move. "You come through me, Sheriff." The older man stepped forward first. Finn hesitated, then followed, his young face etched with uncertainty. I didn't reach for my weapon. I let them come. Let them see I wasn't bluffing. Let the cold settle around my shoulders like armor preparing for the inevitable. The standoff broke fast. I didn't fight, didn't raise a hand. By the time they tied my wrists behind my back, the rough rope biting into my skin, I didn't look at them. I looked at the cabin, at the place that had been silent too long, broken too long, but had started to feel like something more than just shelter. I saw the curtain shift, a fleeting glimpse of Alara's presence. They took her next. Didn't yell, didn't drag, just stepped inside and gave her no choice. When Alara walked out between them, her jaw set, her eyes dry. I saw the way Finn looked at her. Not like a bounty, not like a criminal. Just confusion, like something in him was arguing with the man standing beside him, his own father. We rode in silence. Snow kicked up behind the horses, a swirling white cloud. Leather creaked, a mournful sound. Chains rattled once, then stopped. I watched the trees slip past branches heavy with ice, each one a stark skeletal silhouette against the pale sky. My hands stayed numb, not from cold, but from knowing what came next. The grim certainty of injustice. I'd been on both sides of the badge. I knew the kind of justice you get when the law serves money first. Finn rode beside Alara. He didn't speak to her, but he kept glancing, kept stealing looks when his father wasn't watching, a silent battle raging within him. Night fell early, a sudden brutal descent into darkness. By the time we made camp, the sky had turned to bruised purple clouds dragging low like heavy swollen wounds. The fire snapped hard wood, popping in the intense cold, a desperate attempt to ward off the encroaching chill. Vance kept to himself, reading the warrant again like he needed to convince himself it meant what he said. It did his face grim. I sat tied to a stump, the rope chafing my wrists. Alara was across from me, her arms wrapped around her knees, a small huddled figure. She hadn't said a word in hours, her silence a heavy shroud. Then just before sleep could settle, I heard her shift. She was trembling, not from cold, but from a deep internal fear. Her shoulders jerked sharp. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Her hand slid towards something hidden in her coat. Small, jagged, a stone. I knew it before she raised it, before she pressed it hard against the soft skin below her jaw, a desperate act of self-preservation. I moved first, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me, but Finn was faster. The boy leapt forward, grabbing her wrist, knocking the stone free with a sharp, decisive movement. Alara didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just froze, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and surprise. And I watched Finn hesitate. Really hesitate. For the first time since we left, Vance barked at him, "Leave her," but Finn didn't move. He crouched there, his breath loud in the stillness, his face pale, looking at her like he'd seen something. No amount of law books had prepared him for a truth that shattered his preconceived notions. I met his eyes, a silent plea passing between us. "You still think she's the one that needs arresting?" I challenged, my voice low but firm. Vance stepped forward, gun drawn now, his face contorted with rage. "You say one more word, I'll put you down." As resisting I stood, even bound, even tired. My voice didn't flinch. "If you think putting chains on her makes this land yours, then you've never stood on ground you didn't steal." Vance's face twisted, a mask of fury. "This ain't about race. This is about law. You ever try explaining the law to a mother burying her children after a cavalry raid?" I retorted, my voice laced with bitter irony. The air between us snapped like a stretched rope, thick with unspoken history and simmering resentment. Finn stood. Enough, his voice cut through everything, sharp and decisive. Vance turned, his eyes narrowed, daring. "You forget who you are, boy." Finn's jaw worked, a muscle twitching. His hand went to his holster, not drawing, but resting, a silent threat. "I didn't sign up to chase women through snow for a piece of land and a drunk man's memory." Vance stared, cold, unyielding. But Finn didn't look away. The fire cracked again, a sudden burst of light and sound. No one slept that night. And when dawn came, the frost on the saddle straps looked like veins across leather, a chilling omen. Something had shifted. Not finished, not clean, but shifted. And the ride back would not go the same way it started. Snow fell again the morning we left the sheriff behind. It wasn't loud. It never was. But it made every breath feel like it had a weight to carry. Finn untied our wrists first. No ceremony, no apology. He just knelt beside me, knife to the rope, his eyes cast low like he didn't know how to wear the thing he'd just done, the profound act of defiance. Alara didn't flinch when her binds came loose. Didn't ask why. She just stood, blood returning slow to her hands, a tingling sensation of returning life. She looked at Finn for a moment, not thankful, not angry, just quiet. And in that quiet, something passed between them. A thread, maybe. Something unfinished but true. Vance didn't speak. He sat slumped by the fire, the badge still pinned to his coat like a lie that hadn't bled out yet. His gun had been taken, not by force, just left in the dirt where his son wouldn't hand it back. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. Maybe because he knew. Or maybe because he finally saw it wasn't his law anymore. The trail north forked hard through the hills, veining across frozen rivers and ridgelines where the wind cut fast and deep. Finn led us for hours, silent in the saddle, his back a stoic presence. I followed, my bruised ribs tight under my coat, every step jarring, every breath tasting like iron. Alara rode behind me, her coat patched at the shoulder, hair pulled tight beneath a fur cap. She didn't speak either, but her eyes stayed open, watching, remembering, relearning the way the land moved beneath us, a silent communion with the wilderness. By dusk, we hit the low pass above Pine Notch, the kind of place only those born in the snow would know how to cross. The sun dropped like a stone, and in its place came wind sharp enough to split lips and silence thought. We rode through it anyway, pushing forward with grim determination. When we finally reached the outer edges of the Shishan lands, there was no sign, no gate, just a line in the trees where the world changed. The snow got quieter there, the forest thicker and the air heavier somehow, like breath, carried stories ancient and profound. The village sat half buried in white smoke coiling from low chimneys, hide tents, anchored with stone. No guards, no guns. Just eyes behind canvas watching us come like a storm they'd already seen, once a weary acceptance. Finn stopped short of the rise. He didn't ask, just nodded once and turned back the way we came, his coat flaring out behind him like a final word he didn't say. I didn't call out. I just watched until the boy disappeared behind the trees, a fleeting shadow against the snow. Alara rode in alone. The people didn't move, didn't greet, but when she stepped down and pulled back her coat, an old woman stepped forward, small, wrapped in dark wool, eyes cloudy with time. She didn't speak either, just touched Alara's cheek, then her collarbone, then the empty place near her heart, where the old chain used to sit, a silent acknowledgement of her suffering and her freedom. Alara took out the broken pendant, pressed it into the woman's palm. The woman nodded, whispered something I didn't understand, a soft guttural sound. And just like that, the others opened the circle. They led Alara inside, back to her people. I stayed outside. The sky turned deep charcoal, a vast inky canvas. Wolves called from somewhere behind the hills, their mournful howls echoing through the stillness. I didn't move, just sat on a stone near the edge of the lodge, my boots frozen to the ground, my eyes fixed on the firelight inside that wasn't mine to share. A boy no older than 16 came out an hour later, handed me a blanket, didn't speak. Then he crouched and placed something small on the frozen dirt in front of me, metal-shaped, burnt edges smoothed. I stared down at it, my old cavalry badge. But not as it was. It had been melted down, reformed, reborn into the shape of a bird in mid-flight, wings arched sharp and bold edges carved with lines that didn't belong to any army. It wasn't a symbol of war anymore. It was a mark of witness. I picked it up with both hands. My fingers trembled, a tremor I couldn't control. I didn't mean to, didn't want to, but the weight of it was heavier than it looked, a profound burden of past and present. I didn't cry, not right then. But when I looked up and saw the moon breaking through the clouds, round and cold, and watching it, caught something in my chest and held it there. Not grief, not guilt, relief. For once the night moved on without me. Voices hummed from inside. The sound of laughter, of bowls clinking, of life continuing vibrant and resilient. But I stayed outside. Not because I wasn't welcome, but because some things take time to re-enter even if the door's already open. I slept beneath the stars that night, wrapped in that blanket, the badge-turned bird pressed tight to my chest. I dreamed of rivers and fire, of ashes that didn't sting, and eyes that didn't judge. And when morning came, I stood alone in the snow, the sky softening, the wind finally still. Behind me, the lodge door creaked open. I didn't turn around. Not yet. But the cold didn't feel quite as cruel as it used to. Smoke was the first thing they saw. A low coil rising slow above the trees, like a warning whispered too late. The air had turned wrong, thick, bitter, a metallic tang of burning. I smelled the burn before the others even knew what to name it, a primal instinct screaming danger. I was already running by the time the second column of smoke twisted up into the cold sky, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, children were crying, their terrified wails piercing the air. Women scrambled to gather what they could, their movements frantic. Alara was shouting something in Shashan sharp commands that cut through the panic like a blade through brush. Her voice held no fear, only urgency of fierce determination. But it wasn't enough. Silas Blackwood came in hard and loud, riding ahead of two men who didn't need to know why they were there, just that someone was paying. They didn't speak, just fired the first round into the lodge's outer wall without warning, the shot cracking like a bone snapping in the cold. I saw the sparks fly from the back shed as flames licked up the storage roof, hungry and relentless. The fire didn't roar yet. It hissed low and greedy, crawling through timber like it had patience and purpose, a living, breathing entity. I ducked low and rolled behind the stone wall near the well. A bullet shattered a clay pot inches from my head, sending shards flying. I didn't flinch. Pain had lived in my body too long to earn my attention now. I scanned the tree-line, spotted movement near the elk traps. One of Blackwood's men was circling, rifle drawn, eyes wide with a predatory gleam. I lifted my own sighted, fired once. The man dropped, not clean, but dropped a crumpled heap in the snow. Screams echoed behind the council tent as the women grabbed the children and scattered toward the east ravine. I shouted for them to stay low, but the wind was against me, snatching my words away. Ilara was already there, a blur of motion ushering the smallest through the thickets, pulling hides down over them as snow camouflaged the brush. Her hands bled from clutching the jagged stone path, but she didn't stop, her body moving with a fierce, desperate energy like it remembered more than it had ever been taught. The second gunman lit a torch. I saw him through the smoke, his face lit, orange eyes, too calm, too chillingly detached. He ran, didn't shout, didn't aim. I slammed into the man before the torch could reach the roof. We hit the ground hard, my shoulder tearing against a broken axle, a searing pain. The man was younger, quicker, but I was meaner. Mean in the way a man gets when everything he ever loved is either buried or burned. I drove my elbow into the kid's throat. A brutal, efficient blow took the torch, stomped it out with my boot. Then I staggered back up, breath coming hard, my lungs burning. A shot rang out. I twisted. It wasn't from Blackwood. It was behind me. Silas had come in on foot now, closer than I expected. His revolver already up, aimed directly at me. I reached. Too slow, but before the shot found me, another cracked across the clearing, sharp and decisive. Silas spun, blood blooming just above his hip, a dark stain spreading across his coat. He stumbled, dropped to one knee, looked up, his face contorted with furious disbelief. Another shot hit him in the collarbone. He went down hard, a lifeless heap. I turned to see who fired. Finn stood at the ridge, his coat-torn hat missing, eyes wide but steady, a newfound resolve burning within them. He stepped forward, slow gun, still raised boots, sinking in snow, a silent avenger. Silas was still alive, barely. Blood bubbling in his throat, breath gurgled and wet. He looked up at Finn like a man trying to understand betrayal with a mouthful of gravel. "You side with savages now," he croaked, his voice raw with hatred. Finn looked down at him. No rage, no glory. He sighed a weary exhalation. I side with people." He fired once more, a final merciful shot, then dropped the gun. The clearing fell still. Only the wind moved now, a soft, mournful sigh. The last flames licking at the old barn roof gave one final crack before collapsing in on themselves, sending a shower of sparks into the night. Embers danced up into the black sky like souls set loose, ascending to the heavens. Ilara stepped from the trees, her face streaked with ash, dress torn at the hem. I saw her shoulders finally drop, the immense burden she carried momentarily lifted. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. I walked to her, slow, my chest heaving, every muscle aching. We stood at the edge of the smoke and watched the last of it die, a silent vigil. Behind us, the villagers came out one by one. They didn't cry. They didn't cheer. They just gathered, hands on shoulders, eyes scanning the damage, counting who was still breathing, a quiet testament to their resilience. One child pulled at Ilara's sleeve. She knelt and wrapped the girl in both arms, a tender embrace. I watched them a while, then looked toward the boy on the ridge. Finn didn't move, didn't smile, didn't need to. He just nodded once, then turned and disappeared back into the snow, a silent guardian. By the time the river started to thaw, most of the blood had already soaked into the dirt hidden beneath the melting snow. Spring didn't come like a celebration that year. It came like a slow breath held too long, finally let go, a quiet release. The ice cracked along the Bitterroot in long silver fractures, creaking like old bones awakening from a long slumber. The water below ran dark and deep, carrying branches and silt and the memory of things it didn't ask to hold. I, Elias Thorne, stood at the edge of it all. My boots sunk into the wet ground, my coat buttoned to the throat, though the cold had started to ease its relentless grip. My face was leaner, now scarred in places the eye couldn't reach, etched with the trials I had endured. I didn't carry a gun today, just a stone smooth and dull resting in the palm of my hand like a weight I'd chosen to bring back. The spot was the same. I could feel it in my ribs, in my knees, in the slope of the land where I'd knelt that morning months ago and pulled a stranger from under the ice. The willows were still dead, branches still black and bare, but the water moved freer, now a vibrant current. The air smelled like something waking, a fresh, earthy scent. I crouched by the roots and stared into the current. It didn't feel like a memory. It felt like it was still happening, over and over, her hand rising, my reaching back, the profound silence of the world watching. I opened my fingers. The stone caught a little light, faint and gray. It wasn't much to look at. Jagged flat on one side, still stained faintly where her blood had soaked into it. That night she thought dying was the only exit. I hadn't meant to keep it, but I hadn't been able to let it go either. Not until now. I didn't speak, not out loud. I just closed my eyes and let my hand drift open over the water. The stone slipped from my palm, fell without a sound, and vanished beneath the surface, absorbed by the river's embrace. I stood slowly, not older, just quieter. Life at the edge of the Shoshan village had become something different. Not exile, not welcome, but space. I'd helped them mend roofs after the fire-hauled wood through snowdrifts kept watch on the ridge. No one asked me to stay, but no one asked me to leave either. Sometimes that was more than enough, a quiet acceptance. Most nights I still slept in the shed just outside the main lodge. Not because I wasn't offered a bed, but because the cold reminded me I was still here, still standing, still breathing. The pain in my shoulder hadn't eased. The scar across my side still burned when the weather turned. But it didn't matter. I didn't feel like I was waiting to die anymore. Just breathing, just existing. And sometimes in the quiet moments, that was something close to living. It was Alara who came to find me. She didn't say a word when she stepped down beside me near the riverbank. The wind shifted a little, brushing her braid over her shoulder. She was wearing that same patched coat, now lined with fox fur. Someone in the village had sewn it in thanks. Her boots were muddy. Her eyes calm, a deep, knowing gaze. I didn't turn. I just reached into my pocket and held something out toward her without looking. She took it gently. When she opened her palm, she recognized the shape instantly. The same stone, no longer jagged, smooth at the edge where my hand had held it too long. She stared at it for a moment. Her breath came slow, a soft sigh. Then she tossed it into the river. No hesitation. I looked at her. Then her hand found mine. Not out of need, not out of fear, but choice. The kind that came after everything else had been stripped away, leaving only raw, honest connection. We stood there in the hush of the afternoon, just two figures beside the water. Shadows stretched long across the thawing earth. No promises, no declarations, just present, just enough. Far behind us, children were laughing somewhere near the lodge. Smoke rose from cook fires, steady and warm. An elder's voice drifted faintly on the breeze, telling a story to the younger ones about how rivers remember things people forget. I believed that. I always had. I closed my eyes again, not because I was tired, but because in that moment there was nothing left to defend. No part of me I needed to hide. The river ran steady, and somewhere beneath the surface a stone settled, not buried, just placed. And beside it, footprints slowly faded under the shifting mud, disappearing not because they were lost, but because they had finally led somewhere worth stopping. There are places in this world where the wind carries more than cold, where it drags memory across the land like a shadow that never fully lifts. Places where silence doesn't mean absence, but reverence. Out in the forgotten corners beyond the towns and the tidy graves, there are still stories whispered between trees. Stories written not in ink or stone, but in the choices people make when no one's watching. This was never just about survival. It was about what happens when the weight of the past presses down so hard it nearly steals your name, and what it takes to lift your head again. It was about the courage to see beyond what someone has done and look into who they might still be. About the quiet, stubborn work of rebuilding not a home or a life, but a sense of worth that someone once tried to take. And about the rare, unspoken grace of being seen, truly seen, without condition. Sometimes healing doesn't come in loud, sweeping moments. Sometimes it arrives in the small silences. A pot left on the fire, a coat mended without asking, a stone laid gently in the river. Sometimes mercy wears the face of someone you don't understand and trust, begins with the simple act of staying close when it would be easier to walk away. This story reminds us that justice without compassion hardens into cruelty, that freedom isn't something given, it's something claimed slowly, painfully, and often alone, and that the line between a stranger and a savior is often thinner than we think. People break, but they can be pieced back together. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly, with hands that don't try to own or save, only hold. Out where the trees grow gnarled and the winters bite deep, there are still wounds too old for medicine and scars too quiet for sympathy. But even there, light can find its way in. Through kindness, through defiance, through the choice to protect what no one else thought worth protecting. And maybe, just maybe, in that flicker of light, someone finds their way back to themselves. There are seasons in life when the past feels heavier than the present, and the cold winds of regret seem to cut deeper than any winter. But even in those moments, there is a truth worth holding on to. Healing does not always arrive in grand gestures or sudden miracles. It often comes in small, quiet acts. A hand reaching into icy water, a coat placed gently on weary shoulders, a silent decision to stay when walking away would be easier. The story of Elias Thorne and Alara reminds us that no one is beyond redemption, and no pain is too deep for the light of compassion to reach. Forgiveness, both giving and receiving, can transform even the most hardened hearts. And freedom is not something granted by others. It is something we claim slowly, sometimes painfully, often alone. As we age, we understand more than ever that the worth of a person lies not in what they have done, but in who they choose to become. To those carrying heavy memories, let this be a reminder: you are not defined by your scars, but by your courage to keep moving forward. Even in the quietest winters of life, kindness, whether offered. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.